welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name is Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Today's show is going to be different. Now, yesterday, I had something planned different for today. I know we were going to get onto trust and we were going to take a little different look at trust, but I talk about trust a lot. I think our community talks about trust. I think psychologists around the world talk about trust and communication and all of these things, and they're super important. I'm not saying it is. The subject is, it's never ending because you can always talk about it. But while I was putting that together, and literally I was writing out the script for today and doing all these things that I wanted to talk about, a different question popped into my head and it completely changed the direction I wanted to go. So, you know what? Sometimes it just happens and you start thinking about one conversation you want to have, and then all of a sudden something deeper grabs your attention. And well, for me, I just can't let it go. So today we're going to talk about that. Now, Chris, what are we talking about? And I know you're seeing the title, Wanting to Own Your Past. Now, imagine for a moment two people who dated years ago. Life happened, went their separate ways. 10, 15 years later, they reconnect. Now, during that time apart, one of them lived an entire life, right? You grow up, you have experiences, new relationships, you form new memories. You've laughed and struggled and learned hard lessons, and all those shaped the person that stands in front of you today. But the other person can't stop thinking about those missing years, not because they necessarily want the relationship back that was prior, and not because they're competing with the other person. They're struggling with the fact that an entire chapter of someone's life exists that they were never a part of. Now, before I get into all of that, I want to do what I always do, and I want to take a moment and thank you all for being here. All right? If you've just been listening since the start, been here with me, hammering away week after week, year after year, I appreciate you being here. And again, I read all of your emails. And I appreciate them all. As a matter of fact, for one special person out there whose email and somebody I've talked to, Tesha from Mumbai, thank you. Appreciate the conversations and I appreciate you reaching out. These conversations are made, like I said, to inspire, to make us think, to make us go, what are we? What's kind of sitting around inside of our minds? To someone else in Croatia, 100%. I hear you. I see it all, right? And every one of my shows, every one of these conversations starts because a question or a comment that gets shared. Now, if you love following along with what I do here on the show, you follow me on Spotify, do me a favor. If you're on the app, go over, click the three little buttons, the three little dots, rate the show 5 stars. This allows other people to find the show. If you're following me on YouTube, like, subscribe. That way you'll know when new shows drop. If you're on Apple, rate the show 5 stars. Let's get that rating up as well. I'd really appreciate if you do these things. It allows me to keep the show at least being, I don't want to put the show ever behind a paywall. In 4.5 years, I've never done that, right? So also, if you'd like to support the show, there is a link in the show's description, right? There is a minimum. I explained that last week. I had to do that, and I'm not going to go into it today, right? But all of that helps support what I do week in, week out. All right, let's get back to these two people. Now, the more I sat with this possible situation, right, the more I realized that it wasn't about jealousy, and it really isn't about trust either. It was about something that I think is much more subtle and common than we realize. It came down to one question that I haven't been able to shake. When does learning about someone's history become trying to possess it? Because I think there's a real profound difference between wanting to understand someone's past and wanting that past to have belonged to you. And once I started thinking about that distinction, I realized that the conversation I wanted to have today, this is what I wanted to talk about. So I'm sorry if you came here looking for that trust episode. I've done it. It's played. And I'll do it again in the future. I'll come back to it. But this is the conversation we need to talk about today. Now, what happens when we say we want honesty? And I want to start was something I think almost all of us would agree on. If you're getting to know someone, it's natural to be curious about their past. In fact, I'd probably say it's healthy, right? We ask where they grew up, their family, childhood, relationships, right? What they've learned through life, maybe their hurts, things that make them laugh or broke their heart, because we don't want to repeat those mistakes, right? We want to be the better version, right? We want to know about the things that shaped them into the person they are today. Now, none of those questions are strange. They're very common for us. They're a part of getting to know somebody else. Sometimes those conversations become a little bit more uncomfortable, right? We might talk about previous partners. We start actually asking about sexual experiences, maybe marriages, betrayals, mistakes we'd rather not have made. Those aren't always an easy discussion, but they are important ones because they give us context about someone. They help us understand somebody's emotional range and that person that's sitting across from us. So when people tell me, I just want honesty, I believe them. And I don't think most people are asking those questions because they're looking for ammunition or they're trying to call somebody out. I think they're asking because they're trying to understand. We all want to know who we're investing our time in or our trust or even our heart. But I think there's another reason we ask about the past that we don't often talk about, or more specifically, we don't even want to acknowledge. We believe that the past explains the present. Now, in some contexts, that's true. But if we understand what somebody lived through, then maybe we're going to understand why you react the way you do today, right? Why certain things matter to you, right? Or you when you pull away or hurt, or why certain words affect you, more than others, you know? Or if somebody values honesty so deeply, or you struggle to trust, they give us a map. It helps us make sense of the person we're trying to know. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with any of that. The truth is, none of us arrive in a relationship as a blank slate. Every friendship, relationship, success, disappointment, betrayal, all of these things leave a mark inside of us. And some of those marks are really obvious, others are almost invisible, but together they shape and become part of who we are. And if you think about it, we don't actually fall in love with someone's potential. We fall in love with the person standing in front of us. And that person is the sum of thousands of moments we'll never witness. And that's just the reality of it. So curiosity here isn't the problem. And definitely wanting honesty isn't an issue. Wanting to understand someone's story isn't even the problem either. I don't think something changes. It's small enough that we often don't even think about when it's going on. Somewhere along the way, our question stops being about understanding the person in front of us, and they start becoming about the parts of their life we wish had happened differently, right? Maybe it's we wish they didn't date that person or had a certain experience, right? Now, if we're just quickly looking at this, those thoughts don't seem unusual. And probably most of us have had them at some point. I think they're worth paying attention to because they mark the beginning of a very different conversation. Which then leads me to a question. I want to, and I want you to sit with it before I even go any further. When you're asking about someone's past, are you trying to understand who they are? Or are you becoming uncomfortable with who they were? Because those are two very different questions that sound identical, but they lead us to two different places. So let's talk about the illusion of ownership. I think this is where the conversation starts to change because on the surface, everything we've talked about to this point is completely reasonable. We, ask about someone's past because we want to understand them, right? All those things, honesty and context, right? How they became who they are today. Now, none of that is unhealthy. As a matter of fact, I'd argue it's the most important part of building a relationship. But I also think there's a point where there's a shift. Now, most of us don't even get when that happens or why. Now, Take a phrase where we've probably all heard before, maybe even said ourselves, "Gosh, I wish I met you sooner." It's one of those things people often say because you know what? It sounds so romantic. And I don't think there's actually anything wrong with it. But if you found someone who genuinely matters to you, of course, there's that part of you that wishes you had met them sooner to build a life before. That's a very human feeling. The problem isn't the sentiment. The problem is that it just doesn't stop at that moment. I wish I met you sooner slowly becomes for some people, I wish those years had been mine. And that's a different idea. One is about wanting more of your own relationship, and the other is about wanting ownership over a part of somebody else's life that existed before you even arrived. That's a difference. It can be small, but it is a difference. And I think it's one of the most important distinctions that we're going to talk about today because that's the moment where curiosity starts giving away or starts giving way to something else. And the more I've been sitting with this morning and having coffee and coming out of group and all these things, the more I started asking myself what people are actually struggling with. Is it really the former partner? Is it the relationship? Or, is it something even deeper than that? Because when people describe these feelings, they often are not talking about the other person at all. They're talking about the experiences. They hate knowing someone else got to take that trip. They don't like that somebody else saw them graduate or had holidays or decorated an apartment at Christmas. They just, even the fact that there was something simple like a chapter of their life that they're never going to get to be a part of. So when you listen carefully, the focus isn't always on the individual, it's on the memories. And that made me wonder, and it really made me curious if we've been thinking about jealousy a little too narrowly. We usually imagine jealousy about being directed towards another person, but what if that's only part of the picture? What if sometimes we're not jealous of the person at all? What if we're jealous of their experiences, right? So, what if the thing that actually hurts us isn't that someone else existed, but that someone else occupied the moments we're never going to get back, that we can't be a part of and we never lived in? Moments that help shape the person that we're in love with today. And I think that's why this can become so emotionally complicated. Our minds have a incredible ability to imagine ourselves in stories that were never ours. We can see that holiday and the birthday dinners, right? We can see all of these things, right? The laughter in those difficult times. But before long, what we're doing is mentally we're replacing the other person with ourselves. We begin imagining the life we think should have happened instead of the one that actually did. And the problem is that reality doesn't look that way. The past isn't waiting for us to rewrite it for somebody else. Those memories belong exactly where they are, and no amount of wishing is going to change that. So when I realized that, it changed the way I thought about this entire topic. I don't think people are grieving a relationship they never had. Sometimes they're grieving experiences they never lived. And that's a different kind of loss because it isn't rooted in reality. It's rooted in imagination, even fantasy. It's mourning literally a version of history that never existed. And yet it can feel incredibly real because our minds are so good at creating stories about what might have been. And I think that's where the line gets crossed. We stop asking, can you help me understand your life? And we start asking, why wasn't I a part of it? And those questions, they sound similar, but they come from two different places. One invites us closer to that other person, but the other begins to assume we had some claim to the years that were never ours in the first place. And that's the thought that stopped me in my tracks today. Not the jealousy, not the insecurity, but the assumption, however unconscious it may be, that another person's history somehow should have belonged to us. Because once you can see that shift, it's a very difficult to unsee it. And I think it forces us to ask a much bigger question. If we genuinely love the person standing in front of us today, can we also accept that the life which shaped them was never ours to own? Now, before I get back into all of this show is supported by Enhanced Mind Counseling. Relationships are rarely shaped by a big moment. More often, they're shaped by the stories we tell ourselves about the people we love, the meaning we attach to their actions, and the patterns we bring with us into every conversation. That's where I spend my time with people, helping them understand those patterns, challenge the assumptions that keep them stuck, and build healthier relationships through greater self-awareness, not guesswork. If that's something you'd like to explore, you can reach out through my website. There's a link in the show's description. All right, let's get back to it. So, why do our minds do this? Why does this happen, Chris? Why can someone else's past affect us so deeply when we know logically that there's absolutely nothing we can do to change it? I don't think that's because we're irrational, and I definitely don't think it's because there's something wrong with us. I think it's because this is what the human mind has always done. Our brains are constantly trying to make sense of our lives, right? Think about it. We replay conversations in our head, decisions we've made, right? We wonder what would have happened if we took that different job or moved to that other city or even spoke up when we should have stayed quiet, right? Every one of us has looked back at our own life and imagined a different version of it. And that's completely normal. God, I've done it. What if I just stayed in law enforcement? What if I just committed earlier to the military? What if I didn't wait until a decade ago to get involved in being in psychology and doing what I'm doing today? Right? It's about imagining something different. And in many ways, that's absolutely how we learn. Our minds compare what happened with what could have happened. So they run those little simulations because they're trying to understand the world a little bit better and hopefully make better decisions moving forward. The trouble is that imagination doesn't always stay in its own story, and sometimes it wanders into somebody else's story. So when we become deeply connected to another person, it's remarkably easy to start imagining ourselves in parts of their lives we never lived in, right? We start seeing uh, being there when they did graduate or got their first apartment or car or, maybe even going through a difficult breakup. We imagined what we would have said and how we would have acted. Now, none of those thoughts are unusual. In fact, I'd argue they're a reflection of how invested we become in that person. The problem begins when those thoughts imagine moments, right? They start competing with the reality. So without realizing it, we stop appreciating the life that actually happened and begin mourning a life that never existed. And we create an alternate history in our minds where we arrived at earlier, where we shaped more first, right? And then where we were present for the moments that actually belonged to somebody else. That's more convincing that imagined history, right? And the easier it becomes to become dissatisfied with the present. I think that's why these feelings become so powerful. We're not comparing reality with reality anymore. We're comparing reality with imagination. And imagination almost always wins because it never has to deal with real life. It doesn't include the arguments or the misunderstandings or any of the disappointments or those ordinary days that make up the genuine relationship in front of us. It only shows us the moments we wish we had. And then we come up against something that I think is one of the hardest realities any of us ever has to accept. The past is permanent. And I want you to think about that for a moment. We can influence today. We can use that to make a different decision tomorrow. We can apologize, forgive, rebuild trust, change careers, move countries, do whatever, right? Those things completely can reshape the direction of our lives. Human beings are incredibly adaptable. But yesterday is untouchable. Not the consequences of yesterday. Those things we can often do something about. Yesterday itself is finished, though. It's in the history books, And guess what? History doesn't negotiate with us. I sometimes wonder if that's the real source of the discomfort. Maybe it isn't the former partner at all, right? Maybe it's the realization that there is an entire version of someone we love that we will never know, right? All those conversations we're never going to be a part of, things we never got to see or experience with them, right? Those experiences helped build the person standing in front of us, yet they existed forever outside of our reach. And for some people, that's a difficult thing to accept because love naturally draws us closer to another person. It makes us want to know them more deeply. It makes us want to understand their story, but understanding someone's story also means accepting that large parts of it happened before we ever showed up. I don't think that's something to fear. I do think it's something to respect. Because every experience, whether joyful or painful, whether we like it or not, contributed something to the person we've chosen to love. And perhaps the real change isn't learning to accept another person's past. The real challenge is learning to respect that it was never ours. So is loving someone now at this point, right? We have to understand this. Loving someone means accepting the person you're going to never meet. Let me explain, because I know this is a complicated prose that I'm putting here. The more I kept thinking about this, I realized something that I hadn't really put into words before. We often say that loving someone means accepting their past. And I don't think that's quite right. I think the harder task is accepting that their past wasn't ours. And that's the difference. And I think for a lot of you, that's going to hit like a truck. I'm not doing this for that effect, but I think it's to start understanding maybe that's what I've been stuck with in this relationship. Accepting someone's past means acknowledging, it did happen. And simultaneously that it wasn't yours, right? But it does mean making peace with the fact that there are moments in the person's life that you're never going to belong to, no matter how deeply you love them today. And think about that for a moment. The 20-year-old version of your partner, that's gone. A 25-year-old version of them is gone. The version of them that got their first apartment, they went on their first, backpacking trip, climbed a mountain, bought a car, crying on the kitchen floor, first time they got drunk and threw up, right? All of those decisions that, everything they've done that changed the course of their life, those versions no longer exist. And no one gets them back. Not you, not even them. It's just part of being human. Life only moves in one direction. Every friendship they built, every relationship that they experienced, right? Even if they made mistakes along the way, they wish they had, and every lesson that they learned the hard way, all of it, right, built the person that's sitting in front of you. Now, none of those moments can be separated from who they are today, right? They weren't interruptions to the story. They are the story. And I think that's where love quietly asks something of us. It asks us to stop looking backwards and wishing we'd been there. It asks us to stop trying to mentally insert ourselves into memories that belong to somebody else's history. Most importantly, it asks us to respect the simple truth that those moments did exactly what they were supposed to do. They shaped the person we've fallen in love with. If those years had unfolded differently, if those experiences had never happened, right? If all of that was erased, would this person that's standing in front of me still be the same person that I'm in love with today? Maybe, maybe not. And the truth is, none of us can answer that because every experience leaves a mark. Painful, beautiful, a mixture of both. Together, they become the foundation of somebody's character, their identity. And I think that's why trying to own another person's past is such an impossible task. You're not simply wishing for different memories. You're wishing for a different person, even if you don't realize that's what you're doing. Yet the irony is the very person you're trying to protect those experiences, you know, from only exists because they lived through them. To genuinely love someone is to accept that there are parts and chapters of their life you'll never get to read firsthand. Those conversations, those tears, those victories, all of it, right? They all happened long before you crossed paths. That isn't something to reset, that's something to honor. Those moments were entrusted to another time and another version of that person's life, and they did their job. Maybe that's what maturity and love really looks like. Not wishing you'd been there for every chapter, right? It's just not believing those chapters should have belonged to you. Simply being grateful for that, right? That everything that they experienced, right? And then your lives eventually found each other. Love doesn't give us ownership over another person's yesterday. It gives us the privilege of sharing their tomorrow. So, how do we understand versus possessing? And when I started thinking about this episode, I thought it was going to be about even jealousy a lot, right? Then I thought maybe it was about acceptance. But along the way here, I realized it was something a lot simpler. It was about the difference between understanding another person's story and trying to possess it. And those two things look really close on the surface, but both ask questions of us. They want to know more. They come from even a place of caring. The difference isn't found in the questions themselves. It's found in what we were hoping the answers would do for us. If I'm asking because I want to understand you, every answer brings me closer to who we really are. I begin to appreciate the experiences that shaped your humor, fears, confidences, your insecurities, right? All of these, even those little tiny picadillos, those habits you have, you don't even notice anymore. I'm learning the roadmap of your life, not so I can judge it, but so I can love you more completely. That's intimacy. But if, on the other hand, I'm asking because I'm quietly hoping I'm going to find a way to make peace with the fact I wasn't there, that conversation changes without either of us knowing. Every story becomes something to compare myself against. Every memory becomes another reminder that someone else occupied a space I wish I had, that belonged to me. Now, without intending to, I stopped learning about you and I started negotiating with history. And guess what? History doesn't negotiate. Those facts aren't going to change. That's why this battle feels so exhausting for so many people. They're trying to solve a problem that isn't actually solvable. No conversation can rewrite yesterday. And no amount of reassurance can create memories that never happened. And love from a person that's right next to you can't transport you into the moments that belong to another season of their life. Eventually, we're left with the choice. We can keep asking the past to become something different, or we can allow it to simply be what it is. I know that isn't always easy. Sometimes there are stories that hurt to hear, right? Or images we'd rather not have in our minds, right? I don't think those feelings make somebody weak. I think they make somebody human. The question is what we do next. Do we spend the rest of our relationship looking over our partner's shoulder towards a life that's already over? Or do we turn back to the person who's sitting in front of us? Because that's where life's happening. That's where the love is growing. Not in all those years that we missed or who came before us or the memories we can never enter. It's happening right now. In the ordinary moments we're creating together without even realizing they'll become the memories one day too. Maybe that's the quiet lesson in all of this. Love was never meant to give us ownership over another person's story. It gives us something much more valuable. It gives us a place in the chapters that are still waiting to be written. And if we're lucky enough to have that, we already have everything we need. Now, as I wind this down, I want to leave you with this thought today. Yesterday, I asked, how do you know when trust is truly deserved? I genuinely thought that was the episode. I was going to record, I wrote my script, right? But along the way, that conversation pulled me in a completely other direction. And it made me realize that trust may begin much earlier than we think. Perhaps it begins with the moment we stop asking another person's past to belong to us. And I know that's not always easy. Loving someone naturally makes us curious, makes us want to know every part of them and understand them and all of their journeys that brought them to us, to that moment. There's nothing wrong with that. And in many ways, that's one of the most beautiful parts of intimacy. But just be careful that curiosity doesn't quietly become ownership. Because the person sitting beside you today isn't waiting to have their life or their history corrected. They aren't asking you to compete with the people who came before you or to somehow rewrite the memories that shaped them. They're simply asking to be loved for who they are now and carrying everything that made them who they are today. And maybe that's what trust really grows from, not believing we know every chapter, not believing we would have written a better story, just accepting that someone else's life was already in motion long before ours became part of it. So I'm going to leave you with my question, as I always do. When you think about the person you love, are you trying to understand the road that brought them to you? Or are you still wishing you'd been the one walking beside them all along? There's a big difference between those two things. One deepens love, and the other quietly steals your ability to enjoy it. Now, I know I'm not going to apologize for switching today. I couldn't get this out of my head. And I wanted to talk about this because it's just, the more I thought about it, there's so much here. I know you all want me to do the devotion thing. It's coming. All of these things, the politics are coming. But this show was important. So what is slated? What's coming up? Like I always talk about. So I do have a show. I'm going to do the show between obsession and devotion because I just wrote about that recently. If you haven't read, I'm going to do that. I am going to do, because people keep talking about politics, and I kind of centered where my view is. But they made my point for me the other day. I got asked in an AMA, what do I think? Do I think politics belong in kink? Well, if you're asking me my opinion, no, I came to kink because it allows me to just enjoy my life and set down when I walk through that door, I am not, the psychotherapist. I'm not the consultant. I'm not the former military guy. I am just me walking into a dungeon space and going to have a scene. That's it. Or watch a scene or watch a demo, whatever. I get to enjoy the people around me. But I think once you start infiltrating it, from my personal view, that's what I'm going to talk about it. Because then we've created the mentality of us versus them. And it doesn't matter what side you're on. And then the space is hostile. And then I don't want to be there. And then we leave, right? And then you're just stuck around a bunch of people who think like you. And the moment any one of you, by the way, has a different thought, that creates groupthink and you're out and you're excluded. And this cycle repeats. And eventually that circle is going to get smaller. And guess what? You're stuck by yourself, staring at a corner wall and pissed off at the world, blaming everybody else except yourself. So we're going to get to that conversation. There's another conversation. I want to talk about hate inside of the community. I've been a part of something for the last few weeks where I've been talking to some people and I've been trying to arrive at where I fit in that side of that conversation. It's not my story. I don't even know if these people are going to want to talk about it. But I think I arrived at the question, and it's really, how do I know when a community I love is no longer a community I want to be a part of when those ideals are cast aside? I'm paraphrasing my question here. It's an important one. It's a big question, guys, because the world has changed and people's views have changed. A lot of those views are extremely uninformed. Now, I'm not going to say this part because I'm better than anybody else, but I've been around. What a lot of you don't know is what I used to do in my former life, just before the military. And I used to do stuff for the government. So I've been places that a lot of people who are very passionate, and that's fine, don't have a major understanding. But when you take on those mantles, there's harm to others that you're causing that have nothing to do with it, just because they have a particular faith or culture or religion, right? And I want to approach that conversation. I'm going to try to go as neutral as I can. But if you box me in, I'll tell you what side I'm on. And that's just because I'm can't believe what I'm saying. But that's again another conversation. There's some other things coming up. I am trying to get somebody on here that I want to talk to, them and their partner. I'm not going to tell you who that is yet because I'm still going back and forth with them. That's okay. Again, if you want to come on the show and you want to talk to me about something, let's talk. It has nothing to do with that. I just invite, attractive only people. I'll talk to anybody, right? But it's got to be something for all of us. It can't just be, I'm not going to sit here and listen to a 45-minute therapy session about you bitching. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to do that, right? It's got to be something for all of us. It's got to be enough that it's going to make both sides think. That's what I want. That's what this show is all about. It makes us think. Okay. All right. That's enough. I have no other updates about that. Nope. When the other stuff is ready, I'll let you know. Just going to wind this down. I know it's a long episode. I'm going to give you my question again and get out of here for the day. So here it is. When you think about the person you love, are you trying to understand the road that brought them to you? Or are you still wishing you'd been the one walking beside them all along? It's a big question. I want to see the comments, right? I want you to rate me on Spotify or start liking more videos on YouTube. I'm not asking you for a lot. I'm really not. And by the way, every time you do, it makes me happy, right? Because that means I know that I'm connecting to all of you, right? But let's see some comments on this one because I think this is going to hit you all a little bit differently. And I'm glad I did this show today and I'm glad I changed my mind. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.